Andi Simon. You are a corporate anthropologist. You help executives see their companies with more observant eyes. You are the founder and CEO of Simon Associate Management Consultant. You are the author of On the Brink, a fresh lens to take business to new heights. And more recently, you just wrote a book called Rethink, Smashing the Myth of Women in Business. And there are so many myths, and we need you to dismantle all these myths. So, Andi, thank you for being here.
What a pleasure. I'm so delighted to be here for you and your listeners. It's just such fun. Thank you for having me.
I tell you, Andi, I tell you beforehand, I am one of those persons who have myth in my mind. So I want you, especially one or two that I'm going to bring up. So I want you to smash them, destroy them, not only for me, but of course to everybody else who still have this mythology of the men of the past and have not been updated to the new generation of women leaders. So I wonder if we could start by you telling us a little bit about your background. First of all, what is it that attracted you towards anthropology?
What a wonderful question, because it's my origin myth, talking about myths. We create our own origin myths about our past. So I often tell people that when I was in college, I had the luxury of wandering around searching for what I wanted to study. And I fell into an anthropology course and I just caught it. It was like it was who I was. It was the way I observed and listened and thought about and synthesized. And I was just fascinated with how different cultures got the same things done in very different ways. And so I went into anthropology as a career. I'll tell you a funny story. I met my husband when I was 19, and he and I were sitting on a beach on Schroon Lake. And he said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "Well, I can either be an attorney or an anthropologist." He said to me, "Oh, be an anthropologist and I'll be here for you." And so he is. 54 years later, we're still together. But the interesting part was that I knew who I was, not what I was going to do. And when you become in love with a field, it's a purpose. And so I got into anthropology. I did my research on Greek immigrants and return migration. You'd appreciate that because you're from somewhere in a foreign country, making a life of your own. I was interested in how they created a new reality. And I actually took my daughters when they were 4 and 5 to spend several months on a Greek island to study Greek women. Little did I know that it was an early stage in my fascination with the power and skills of women to really influence their sons and keep influencing. So it was a wonderful time. And then, let's see, around 1980, my husband was at Citibank. I had tenure. I was a professor, an academic, and he introduced me to a bunch of Citibankers who said, "Come help us change." And I said, "Oh, how interesting. Could an anthropologist get into business?" And people at that time said, "Oh no, anthropologists don't do that. They study small scale societies." And I said, "What makes you think a business isn't a small scale society?" And so I got into business. And for 14 years, I was an executive at 3 banks. And then I got into healthcare as an executive to help them change in response to managed care. And healthcare keeps changing. And then after 9/11, I launched my business as a corporate anthropologist to help organizations change. And I must tell you that change is something humans hate to do. You think about an immigrant or a migrant or somebody who has to go someplace new and they make it up. But nobody who's stable really likes to think about what else they can do. The habits take over. And in business, we don't even know what we're doing every day. We just go about it in a very habit-driven way without thinking. And then the myths begin to emerge. And we think that what we're doing is the right way to do it. Every client starts out with saying, "No, we don't do it that way. That's not the way it's done." I said, "So how shall we change?" You have to begin to change the stories and the sacredness. People say, "What's a myth?" I said, "It's something that goes from folklore to being sacred. The gods are telling us that's the way it should be. That's the way we should run a bank or we should run a manufacturing company." And you mentioned my first book. In my first book were 7 case studies of clients of ours, all of whom had gotten stuck or stalled because they so believed this was the way we do things, they couldn't change. And we helped them step out and look at it with a fresh eye. And I say to them, if you want to change, you have to see it, because we decide with the eyes. You have to feel it, because you buy with the heart and then you have to think it. Because if you can see, feel, and think, then you can do. But it isn't the data that's going to help you. Anthro 101, data doesn't exist. There is no data. Out of context, it has no meaning. And humans have this wonderful brain that creates meaning. It gives it symbolic value. And then we think that's the way it's supposed to be done until you have to change. So that's what I do. And that's
Wow,
why.
that's amazing. Okay, so I'm going to tackle the first myth that is when you told your husband that you wanted to be an anthropologist or an attorney, I think you said, he says, oh, be an anthropologist because I'll be here for you. And this reminds me, when I was going to college, my girlfriend at that time, she wanted to study anthropology. No, she was an anthropologist major and I was an economics major. And, you know, in my mind, I dismissed the whole career of anthropology. I said, what are you going to do with your life? You are either going to end up as a professor, which is not a bad thing, but most likely you will be a secretary somewhere because there are not that many anthropologist jobs. And the same reaction I gather you have from your husband. He says, you be an anthropologist, I'll be here for you. I'll be the backstop because you probably would need it. So can you dispel that myth that anthropology jobs are, I don't know, like something rich people do that don't have financial needs, maybe?
Well, you're raising two things. One of which is that anthropology is the worst major to be in a US academic institution because business hasn't discovered the value of anthropologists. Microsoft has a lot, Intel has a lot, the US government has a lot, but there isn't a lot of general business requirements for anthropologists. They don't really know how they can add value innovatively. Sometimes anthropologists get brought in to do the check off the box on user experience. And sometimes it's brought in for design thinking, for ethnographic work. But you know, there's no huge demand. So you're right about the challenge. On the other hand, my husband and I have had a partnership for all these years. And while he said, I'll be there for you, it never dawned on me that he had to be there for me. When I went off to do my exploring, he stayed home. Even when I took my daughters, he stayed home. And we have had career alignment over the years. He's a serial entrepreneur and he's built several businesses quite successfully. And I've been here for him. He's been here for me. And we both raised two amazing daughters who are happily married with great grandkids, and they are happily professions. So somehow we did it okay. But you had a great point there. The assumption was that if I went off and did this exotic thing, he'd be the mainstay breadwinner. But as you know, 40% of the breadwinners in the US at least are women. And they are often the major breadwinners, not just the secondary ones. And 40% of the businesses in the US are run by women, owned by women.
I didn't know those statistics. Those are amazing. Can you say that again?
Yes, 40% of the breadwinners in the US are women.
Nice.
And 46% of the businesses are owned by women or run by them, right? And 400,000 women are attorneys, which is 40% of the attorneys. They're not the owners yet. We have work to do, and they're not the partners. 65% of the accountants today are women, but they're not the partners either. So women have become the workers, and they are earning good monies. And they are, you know, the pandemic has made an impact on all of this, but they have an amazing place that's growing in the C-suite, on boards, as entrepreneurs, as business developers, and there's a shift happening. I must tell you, though, that as I said what I said, I could hear my husband and other men saying, I'll be here for you. And to your question about the myth, it becomes sacred. That's the way we think. That's the way our mind responds. That's the script. It's a most interesting time to change. I have a hunch. My husband might say the same thing today. I'll be here from you, but it's a whole different balancing act. Together, we build better, faster, forward. And we've had a great time doing that. And we've been here for each other. So,
okay. So you just mentioned all these women rising, being attorneys and accountants and all this and that. And one trend that I have noticed in the past decade is that more women are graduating from secondary school than men. So I believe the base of women is growing bigger and bigger. And even because there is no other choice, they have to rise to the top. Because, what are you, I mean, we all know there is a bias towards men leadership, but if the pool of talent, there is a bigger pool of women, then eventually they have to raise to the top. Uh, can you give us some feedback on the amount of women finishing secondary education and the pool of labor for men and women?
Well, you're raising a wonderful dilemma, because 65% in the US, the 65% of the graduates from higher education are women.
Wow.
And that's a lot of women relative to the men. There are all kinds of subsets to that. The Ivy Leagues do not have gender parity in their classes. They are looking for gender parity, not for women to take over. I get it, it's okay. But here's what happens very often is that the women get into business and they aren't allowed to move up the pipeline. So for example, in the banking industry, most of the bank presidents are men. And they complain that women aren't in the pipeline to move up into those senior positions, as if it's a woman's problem. And so what a woman does when she gets into that industry, and I was a banker for a number of years, is that you move up and then you get stopped. And it's not hard to see all the different ways that that happens. A lot of women, leap off that ladder as it gets closer because the pressure to perform is that higher. The number of valedictorians in the US graduating from high school that are women is well over half, but the success doesn't follow. And so there are all kinds of interesting challenges as we find that pipeline not full, but it is full. And there's some wonderful work. There's a gentleman that I know who's doing work in staffing. And he said all the workers are the women, the staffers, all the recruiters, but all the men run the different offices. And there's other research which shows that the recruiters bring in a diverse workforce, but the hire folks who look and act like them. And so you don't get the diversity in there. The challenge is, and there have been a couple of articles in the Harvard Business Review on gender fatigue. One came out just last week. And that the men talk about diversity, inclusion, and equity, but don't quite know how to live it, how to act it. We can be angry about it, but I don't think it's something to be angry about, because I do think that if you don't know how to live it, you say the words and you don't even notice what you're actually doing. And consequently, you don't know that you're having meetings with just the guys. Or at that meeting, if there are girls, women, they don't have anything that you will listen to. So when they speak, you ignore them. And the tensions are high. The gender bias is the workplace, as opposed to the gender biases. There are all kinds of biases that affect us. So it's complicated on one side, but there's progress on the other. And I don't want to sound like a negative. I think that the momentum is turning into a movement. And to your point, there's a lot of stuff going on now that's going to be transformative. New article today in the Harvard Business Review about how women leaders in this crazy chaos of the pandemic have really risen to the top. And not just in Angela Merkel and Germany or New Zealand or Denmark, it's in business. And what they're finding is that women have a caring facility to really understand their employees, to begin to understand how to mobilize them and motivate them even in trying times. They're very clever and creative and can see how to apply new ways of doing things. And it's a timely piece of research that I just love, because we've been watching, we've been talking, and in my book, I have some wonderful stories about women who lead extremely well.
Wow. And how about as an anthropologist, I'm sure you have made the connection between the invention of the birth pill and women taking a higher role in leadership. I mean, at one time in history, at age 17, 18, a woman was already stuck in the kitchen taking care of kids. Now they can say, okay, I'd rather have a kid later on in my life, maybe when I'm 25 or even 30. And until then, I would like to have a career of my own, so I will not be dependent on my husband. So do you see that relationship anywhere?
Yes, and I do think there's a good documentation on what happens when birth control comes out. I think the thing we're missing is childcare.
Yeah, childcare, yes.
So yes, I want to have a child, but now how do I care for that? How do we raise it? And I do think that boys growing up without fathers is a very serious, I find it a very serious tragedy. There's a wonderful expression You know, that Marion Wright Edelman said, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And there's some boot camps for boys to go to learn to be, I'll say, comfortable with men and able to interact with them in strong ways. The language, you know, you need to be, we're mimics. If I don't see a father act like fatherly, how will I know how to be a father and a dad and a husband myself? So I find that a very disturbing cultural challenge for us. Sounds like you do too.
Yes, yes. My father was never there. So, yeah, so that's another podcast.
I didn't mean to touch on that. No, no problem. I'm sorry. Let's move on.
Okay, so how about the I don't know how much of a myth this is and how much reality, but I continue hearing stories that women end up choosing or being forced to take jobs that are lower paid, like nursing and teaching, as opposed to I don't know, let's say engineering or something of that nature that is had a higher um, quote unquote social value, although I believe nursing and teaching has a higher social value. But I mean, economically speaking,
Yeah,
engineers getting paid more, and those are not the fields populated by women, those are the fields populated by men.
a great question. You know, historically, as women moved into the workforce after the Second World War, we'll leave that aside, the jobs that were open for them were teachers and nurses. And that for they became the myth that that's what women should do. It was caring. It wasn't that far from the kitchen and the caring for children. And so it was sort of a line extension. We knew how to raise kids so we could teach them, and we knew how to care for others so we could be nurses, not doctors. Now, once education opened up and then the opportunities did, now the industries have to change as well. To your point about engineers, you know, the science, technology, engineering, and math fields are not really well populated by women. However, there's a chapter in my book about Sam Radokia, who's a fabulous creator. And in it, I talked about the myth that women aren't good in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. But in fact, they were the early computers.
Hmm.
They were the early creators. They are the myth breakers. They are the ones who code broke during the Second World War. And they were the first to have a computer in the home. I mean, the creativity is in coding. And as Samrad, as we call her, will tell you, I can code, but that's not where the value is. My value is in creating. So she built companies around blockchain and other things that women are doing that add the creative genius to it, as opposed to being in the, what I'll call the routine coding area. But on the other hand, women in those engineering or science jobs often don't get the promotions or the pay that their male counterparts do. And that's a societal transformation that's going to have to come. Women are going to have to demand it on the one side. Industry is going to have to encourage it on the other. And I do think that it's a time for industry, companies, to begin to see the talent. The talent drain is going to turn into a talent opportunity so that talented women can get paid for the talent they bring. And we can begin to see this in a much more gender balanced way, as opposed to, you know, women make 75 or 80 cents on every dollar that a man does. Why? They do the same job. They stand next to each other. It's just a value, a myth about what a woman is worth and a guy is worth. We have to change that. And that just requires us to change it. There's no science there.
I had an interview just a few days ago with a female venture capitalist, and I asked her how come men are getting paid more money than women. And one of the answers is that men are relentless asking for job raise, that she has at her door, at her door, another guy knocking every 6 months asking for a job raise. Hey, I did this new thing, this new research, give me a pay raise. While women, they way into that pay raise comes to them. So according to her, that was one of the reasons of this income inequality.
Well, could be. One of the women in the book, Andi Kramer, is an attorney, and she sat on the compensation committee for her law firm. And she tells the story. She read the performance appraisals of the men and the women. The men, by and large, all climbed the Empire State Building to save the damsel in distress and save the client $500,000 million. They were all heroes. The women talked about how they collaboratively built solutions with their colleagues so that the client never had to lose $500 million. A whole different, and she said it was fascinating. So she's written 4 books on this topic, but she has learned that the women, to this venture capitalist point, don't have a way of presenting their accomplishments without feeling braggadocious about it. They don't compete, they collaborate. They don't command the same way. They mobilize and incentivize people. The woman in my book, Jamie Candy, I know quite well. She ran my husband's company and sold it and then went back to Adventum. And women don't lead. Well, Jamie just led. She didn't lead by command and control. She led by inspiring, by listening to her clients and to her staff, and began to create focused strategies that people could understand and live. Next thing you know, every one of the companies grew 3 times. And I said, how'd you do that? Focus. She said, I know how their minds work. And if I can focus them on the 3 things I have to do around the students come first, everybody lines up and gets it done. And they get it done faster. And the compliments started coming because everyone wanted to succeed. Not for me or I, but for we. It's just a different language. And so it's coming.
Wow. Okay, can you tell us at what stage in your career you decided to write the first book and why? And how do you develop that skill as well? Because that's one thing is to study people and the other thing is to put butt on chair and start writing a book.
A great question, because it took my first book 4 years to come to life. And I think that to some degree, I had a friend who introduced me to an agent. And I wasn't quite sure, talking about change. I wasn't quite sure how to deal with the agent. And I wasn't quite sure I heard what she was saying. She was a good agent. And then I started to work on the book myself, and I wasn't quite sure where I was going with it. And so I finished it, and I had an editor, and we thought we had a good book for something. But I was out of sync with the way you get books published. But I found the publisher, and she said, we're a hybrid. Now it's Greenleaf Book Group. And she said, send us the book, and I'll tell you whether we're interested. We only accept 3%. So I got a call 3 days later and said, this is a great book, but you have to rewrite it. And I went, oh, really? Now, I was writing the book to talk about how people could use anthropology. And I wasn't quite sure why I was writing the book, except that it was time for me to show people how to use me. It was a marketing method. If you didn't know how anthropology could help you, to your point, you could have a great career going nowhere because people can't imagine it. And so I worked with a development editor there who was fantastic. And Joan Tapper and I rewrote the book. And it came together, won an award, brought me great clients, did exactly what it was supposed to do, which was to show people how they could see, feel, and think in new ways, add a little anthropology and grow. And every one of the stories in there was a stalled or stuck customer of ours, a client, who then all of a sudden saw it. And my second book came about because my husband and I set up a program at Washington University in St. Louis called the Simon Initiative for Entrepreneurship. And I was watching these women who we were helping become entrepreneurs, looking for role models. And I said, well, the next book probably would be great if I could get women who I know or others to serve as role models for other women. I'm always into sharing. And I started to pull together, I did 50 interviews of women, all of whom had great stories. And I started to assemble a book. I had a wonderful editor. I'd gone back to the same publisher. I knew now how to do this, as opposed to the first time when I wasn't sure what I was doing. And the second time I knew just what I was doing until my husband and I were driving to Nantucket one June, as we do, and it was a year and a half, 2 years ago. And I said to him, this is the stories that I have, and I'm framing it into this book called The Gift of Story. And he said, Andi, every one of these women is smashing the myths of women in business. I said, oh my gosh, that's a much better book. So I went back and rewrote the book around the myths they were sharing. Yeah, every one of the women were very game because they really didn't intentionally smash myths. They just did what they did without asking. And so Evelyn Medvin is a geoscientist, and they all said women don't go into the field, and she did really well. Women aren't entrepreneurs. So Stephanie Breedlove said, of course we are, and grew a big business and sold it to care.com for $50 million. Every one of the stories was exciting about how they had defied what people said they couldn't do. Now, to your question of I listen, and I find that writing, my podcasts, writing blogs are, I find them a great way to share. It doesn't come easily. And you need a team, because I will tell you, your publisher, if they're good, has a whole lot of good people, from that editor to the copy editor, the proof editor, the marketing team. But the whole point is, what am I doing with this? What's my point? And when people come to me and say, I want to use your publisher, what can you tell me? I said, go backwards. Why do you want to write a book? What's the story? Storytellers. Humans tell, we live our stories, right? And so part of this is the story to tell, and who do you want to hear it? And then you can begin to write even your own story.
Wow.
Does that work?
Okay, so in the book you have 10 myths, and you gave us an extra one, which is anthropologist. And as I see the menu, you have women can be entrepreneurs, good leaders, and myth number 2, good leaders. Women cannot run a fashion business, shouldn't be lawyers, manage money, be college presidents, be your, what is it, number 7? I cannot read my handwriting. Number 8, aerospace, management roles, IT, and anthropologists.
And I think number 7 was higher education.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yes, that's it. So, in regards to great entrepreneurs, when I close my eyes and think of entrepreneurs, these images come to my mind. Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, what is it, Mark Zuckerberg, all these guys, and many of them, they created their business from their dorm room or from their garages. So it's not like they had a lot of finances behind them. And I continue asking myself, the only woman that I can see that started from zero, something of that nature, was Sarah Blakely, the one who started Spandex, who started selling copy machines door to door, and then she devised this fashion garment, and then she built an empire. So my question is, how come? This is my own myth. I know it's my own limited belief, but how come we are not seeing more women in this entrepreneurial high level, whatever the hierarchy that I have put in my head?
So good questions. You have great questions. A couple of things to think about, and then I'll talk specifically about the entrepreneurs in the book. The entrepreneurs aren't just small business people. They're not just running another, whether it's a beauty salon and a necessity business, or a marketing company that looks like others. Entrepreneurs do something different. They take an idea and they turn it into an innovation to add value innovatively. They create a market. And they create a market over often unmet needs, things that people could use, but nobody is seeing how to do it. So Stephanie Breedlove, in the chapter in the book about her, was working at Accenture and had 2 children. And she had a great husband who had a wonderful job as well. And they were successful corporate folks. Except she found that raising her children required a nanny. And when she began to have the nanny, she realized that paying the nanny's taxes was very awesome. It was onerous. So entrepreneurs have this aha moment. I've had it. My husband's had it. All of a sudden you see something through a fresh lens. So she began to talk with her husband about maybe there's an unmet need for us to create a business around helping parents pay nanny taxes. So she went exploring. What does an entrepreneur do? They don't ready, shoot, aim. They begin to sort out, what am I thinking? Is there a real business here? Could somebody pay us to help them do their nanny taxes? Big gap. They didn't have anybody that they could see doing it. It wasn't like there were going to be another marketing agency. They were going to be opening a new market around something that was needed, but nobody seemed to be doing it. They went out and they began to talk to the agencies that placed the nannies. And she talks about this in the book. She said, I went searching. She was an anthropologist without calling herself that. She wanted to listen. How do you do that? And then she talked to other parents. And so she felt their pain, and pain is often a great way to create a business. You know, what are their challenges? And so she began to pick up clients. And next thing you know, she's running the business at night, raising the kids, going to Accenture, and she says, it's time that I left my corporate job and I launched my other business. Her husband kept his, and then all of a sudden he was ready to come over as well. And slowly but surely it grew. Her parents and his parents both said to them, don't do that. Women can't be entrepreneurs. You'll never succeed. Every entrepreneur has heard the same song, men and women. That won't work. No, it doesn't. Nobody will ever think that's good. And then next thing you know, they do it and they say, oh, that was obvious. And so she grew it to 18 million and sold it to care.com for 50 million.
Wow.
And now she is helping others begin to build businesses. But she will tell you that believe it, if you see it and believe it, then all of a sudden things begin to come together. The foreword of the book is written by Maxine Clark, who I just love, who built Build-A-Bear workshops. She smashed the myth of retail. Now, it's many years now. And I was always surprised that more companies didn't realize the opportunity there. But she had a niece and they were out shopping. And the niece was looking at little beanie bears and said, you know, I could make one of these. And Maxine had this sort of epiphany. We always have an aha moment. So she said, well, yeah, why don't we make these? And how could we make them? And then she had this idea that she'd build a retail business where people came in to take a bear and build the bear and dress it. And it would be their unique bear. And next thing you know, she's global and she's got a successful business. Now, I'm not sure it's working right now through the pandemic. But as she wrote, as we talked about the book and she thought about herself, this was a silly, crazy idea that turned into a business because she saw something. And so entrepreneurs see things through a fresh lens. Now, was it easy to raise money? No. And neither of them had easy chances of getting funding. Only 3% of the venture capital money goes to women entrepreneurs. So to your question of how come there are not more big ones, it would help if the venture capitalists could figure out the good but from the not good. And by and large, if a woman comes and talks about her business, they hear different things. They invariably listen to the guy's dreams and the woman's problems. And so there's great research about how if you didn't have a woman presenting, would that idea fly? Would they fund it? And is it the sexism that's there that needs to be overcome as opposed to a bad idea? But it's very hard. And it's very hard to grow a business without funding. And whether it's the bank or it's the VC or the angel funding, if it's not friends and family, it's just plain old hard for a woman to grow a business. Wow. So and that's why the myth is going to proceed to finally collapse as we begin to see women as tremendous creators, and they are.
The woman on this chapter, I already forgot her name, but you yourself, you had a supporting husband and this other woman as well. How essential it is for a woman entrepreneur to have a supporting husband. We know that men are willing to just leave their woman and get a divorce sometime for the sake of the business. And many of these, I don't know, track entrepreneurs with huge track, they have also a huge track of divorce, and we have not much farther than to see the president of the US to see a track of divorces along the way as well.
Oh, that's a very important question because some of the women in the book have partners, some have really supportive spouses, and others are single. And it is and I'm working with some women as an executive coach. Some have gone through 3 husbands. It is complicated because the man has to be able to find a place in that business that fits them and not simply watch. And I do think that the dynamic of which roles are played by who's the rainmaker and who manages the books or who, I mean, these are all complicated relationships. I'm blessed. My husband had been successful as a serial entrepreneur. I didn't have to explain to him. He had his own business, but he sold it in 2017 and joined mine. And I had to figure out, what was I going to say? What was the press release? Successful husband joins wife to do what? And he's set up a whole division to do inbound marketing and picked up a half a dozen of his own clients, and he's living happily ever after. But it is a challenge, and I don't diminish it because There's no happily ever after on any of this. You need to, Jamie Candy has a wonderful husband, a spouse there. Laura Tyler has a wonderful husband who balanced her skills. I think it's really important to find a way to have the right stories that bring them into that story. They're going to live the story. Where is the place for them?
Right. Okay. In your book, I do believe wholeheartedly that women are a good leader, and we have so many examples, and I believe they are good in fashion and law. And but on the topic of money, this is something that happens often. I go to a cocktail party, and for some reason, the guys get into a corner and they start talking about their stocks. I bought Intel, I bought Apple, I'm into cryptocurrency, I bought the latest marijuana stock. And in this conversation, although it would be nice to have a woman, they all go to a different corner to talk about. So it's not that I don't believe that woman can be good money manager. Is my apprehension is on why is there a lack of interest? I mean, I'm sure in a huge population of the United States, some will end up into that career, and of those some will be great. But the pool, I believe, is small, and it's not that nobody's inviting them. I think they're just not coming to the party on their own accord. Why am I getting wrong?
No, you may not be getting wrong at all, because I've been at the same bars and the guys are talking stocks, and quite frankly, it wasn't terribly interesting. And we migrated elsewhere but there are women who are becoming very savvy about what they should know. But I will tell you, Janine Fipro in the book is creating, she has a new book, but she also has a new program for women. And the style is interesting. She's bringing them together, sort of like roundtables or think tanks. So they can learn from each other about what to think about in their investments. And she's also casting it in terms of what they care about: sustainability, the community, social, governance, environmental issues, and how to use their investments for things that matter to them. So I don't think what you described is wrong. I do think the guys compare notes, they compete a bit. They share all of this in a fashion that they feel comfortable with. And I'm not quite sure that those women who, even when they've acquired wealth, inherited wealth, earned their wealth, are into it to the same degree. And I'm not quite sure they should be into it. Maybe, maybe not. But I do know that women are saving well and they're managing well differently.
Yes.
And I do think that we're going to be respectful of the differences. But I also think Janine is right that we need a community of other women who make us feel comfortable about saying, I don't have a clue what you're talking about. Could you explain that to me? And I heard Janine talk to Maxine Clark at a meeting I had, and they were talking about DAFs. And I said, really? And how could you use your DAF in order to, I mean, it was a very sophisticated conversation for sophisticated women.
Wow. Okay. You have given us so much to think about. I have no more question. I wonder if we could close it by you telling us one more time the title of your book. Maybe you can reach back. Do you mind and showing us the book, which is
Here we go. There we are.
perfect. Perfect. And where can people follow you?
Oh, you're so kind. I've had such fun at this podcast. I'm a podcaster. I gotta mimic your style. It's just wonderful. So you can reach me and you can download a free chapter of the book at andysimon.com, A-N-D-I, simon.com. Thank you for downloading. The book is out now, even though it's not really out till January 5th, but I'm finding everybody who's pre-ordered is getting it. Amazon has quadrupled their orders. We're getting lots of good stuff coming through and lots of great reviews. But it's andysimon.com is my website for the book. SimonAssociates.net is our business website where you can learn more about how we help companies and people change. And the book is ready for you. My only request is if you download it and you enjoy it, would you give me a nice review on it? Because Amazon loves it.
Right.
And
Yes.
And we're off and running. People say, what's your next book? I said, let's just get this out of the can and then we'll figure out what comes next. The challenge, Elaine, is that I interviewed 50 women before I put the book together. Every one of them could have been in the book. There's something really magical going on for women today. And so we're setting up workshops to help companies help their women become the best they can be and deal with those pipeline issues. We're going to be launching a program called Rethink with Andi Simon to help women rethink their life's journeys. And we're going to have a wonderful Empowering Women Summit coming up. We haven't got the date fixed yet, but I have someone who wants to do that and help other women. We're into acting, not just talking about the problems, but into actually doing things to make them happen. And it's a great time for change. So thank you for having me today.
And I must add that I listen to your podcast. It's extremely interesting. You have an amazing guest and compelling conversation. And on the place of woman and leadership, if I could be in any country right now, I would choose to be in a country where there is a woman as a leader.
I'm with you. I think there's something magical about what's going on there, isn't there? Yeah, it's bringing people together. There's a good time for it. So
I would rather be under Angela Marco or Jacinta. What's her name? I forgot her
or
last name.
not.
But
Yes.
yeah,
New Zealand. I know.
I mean, not that our prime minister had done badly. I think he had done a great job, but I would feel safer under the care of a woman right
Yeah,
now.
it doesn't hurt to have someone care about you differently. And it's a good time to do that. So you and I will talk again, I hope.
I hope so too. Thank you so much, Andy.
You're welcome so much.